Hi friends, it's Christal here, and today we're going to be talking about that one right bell groove that you've probably definitely heard if you listen to music from the classic Canadian prog rock band Rush. Back in the day, we didn't have Spotify and YouTube and basically all kinds of music so easily accessible at our fingertips, so I was pretty late to discovering Rush. I first heard them probably when I was 19 or 20, but it was just as well because that was the age where I was first really getting into drumming, and this particular groove was such a huge eye-opener for me at the time because it hadn't really occurred to me that your right hand could do something other than play eighth notes and quarter notes or 16th notes. I knew what paradiddles were, I played them, and I knew that all drummers had to practice their paradiddles because they were a rudiment, and rudiments are important for speed and your hands and whatnot. But somehow it never really occurred to me that you could actually use them when playing the drum set. This particular groove is great to directly apply your paradiddles, and it is also a really good right foot speed builder. Let's be real, who doesn't want a faster right foot? If you haven't heard this groove in its native environment before, one of the best tracks to hear it in would be YYZ, because this is an instrumental track and the right bell sections are longer than a lot of the other songs they're in, so it's easier to pick these patterns out. You can hear it at 1 minute 10 seconds, around 2:22, as well as 3 minutes and 46 seconds in that track. YYZ is a little bit fast, it's over 140 beats per minute, so a slightly slower track could be The Spirit of Radio, where this pattern comes in as a 2-bar phrase, as a sort of interlude between different sections in the music. So you can hear the first one at around 34 seconds, but it happens quite a number of times in that song. I've seen way too many inaccurate transcriptions of this groove over the years, so let's clear it up and break it down. The unique thing about this groove is that the hands are playing a linear pattern between the right bell as well as the snare drum. And what that does is it kind of gives more space for the snare backbeats to stand out because they're not being overlapped by any of those busy right bell doubles. Those little doubles are happening before and after the snare backbeats. But before we get to that, the other good thing about a linear pattern is that it lends itself very well to be played on a single surface. So grab your practice pads and you can try this out even if you're not at a drum set right now. The entire pattern is made up of 3 different types of paradiddles, half of each. First one is a single paradiddle, which is right, left, right, right, and we'll just end that with a left hand accent. After a 16th note space, we have a double paradiddle, which is right, left, right, left, right, right. And finally, we have half of an inverted paradiddle, that is left, right, right, left. The first section will sound like this. Right, left, right, right, left. After a space, we have a double paradiddle. Right, left, right, left, right, right. Last bit, left, right, right, left. You can count these as 16th notes and accent the left hand notes that fall on 2 and 4 because those will be our snare backbeats. If I join them all together, here's how the pattern sounds on the pad. It might be a little bit hard to hear when they all sound the same, so if you have a secondary surface on your pad, like the edge over here, that's a clickier sound, you can sort of use that to approximate the bell sound, and you'll have a better idea of how this groove will kind of sound across 2 different instruments. Once we're done with working the pattern out on the pad, it's time to bring it to the drum set and orchestrate it between the right bell and the snare. A couple things to take note of. When you're playing your snare, make sure all your ghost notes are nice and low. Keep them about that height from the surface of the snare, just light taps. Bring your backbeats up and accent those really loudly. And for the right hand on the right, make sure that you're hitting with the tapered part of the stick, the shoulder, and make sure you're hitting at a little bit of an angle. If you hit the right straight up and down, your stick is going to want to bounce off to the side, and then there'll be this weird circling motion that can affect your timing, and also the tone you get is a lot thinner. So let me just demonstrate, and you can hopefully hear the difference between hitting straight up and down versus slightly at an angle. Generally, when you want a fuller tone on the drums, you want to be striking it in such a way that your stick is parallel to the surface you're hitting. So the same thing applies to the right bell. Because it's slanted at a bit of an angle, you want to hit it that way as well. So let's try this pattern between the right bell and the snare. I'll play it slowly, just one bar at a time first, and then I will connect it into 4 bars, repeat it, and then speed it up. Once you have the hand coordination down, the next step will be to add your bass drum notes. It can be pretty challenging to add your right and left hand and the bass drum parts all together at the same time. So what I would suggest you to do is to simplify this into just the kick notes as well as the snare backbeats for a start. And what this does is it gets your ear used to the rhythmic melody that occurs in this groove. And when you add the other parts, like the right bell notes and the snare ghost notes, it'll be so much easier for you to tell if you're actually playing the pattern correctly. Let's give it a shot. Once you're used to that, then it's time to add in the left hand ghost notes on the snare in between your bass drum notes. Now we're done with the two-way coordination, and it is time for three-way coordination. Right bell, snare, and bass drum. Let's go. Congratulations, you've put together the whole groove, but not quite. So there's one more component that I purposely left out of the video so far because it's not the main element of the groove. In fact, it's not very obvious on the record, but you can definitely see Neil playing this in the live shows, and that is the left foot playing the hats on all your quarter notes. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4, while your hands and feet are playing 16th notes. This one is really challenging if you haven't worked on your left foot independence before. So again, I would suggest simplifying it first. Just try your left foot together with the hands, and then try the left foot with bass drum and snare, and then try putting it together. I'll show you all three of those really briefly, but definitely slow it down and break it down further if you need to when you're working on this for yourself. Alright, now you've actually got the whole pattern down. That is the actual ride bell pattern that Neil plays a lot of the time, but what we haven't talked about is how he actually starts the pattern. This drum beat usually occurs in either a 2 or 4 bar phrase, and that's a repeated unit of music. At the beginning of that phrase, he's going to play a crash, and at the end of that phrase, he does a drum fill. I'm not going to talk about the specific drum fills he plays because this video would go on to 5 hours or more if I was going to go through all of those, but we can definitely talk about how to start this beat. When he plays the crash, the interesting thing is he doesn't play any other ride bell notes in that first count, and he also doesn't play any busy bass drum notes. What that does is it creates a little bit of space that occurs after whatever fill was right before the crash. This is what I like so much about this beat because there are these pockets of space and it's not just all busy 16 notes throughout. And I think that's partly what makes it such a musical kind of phrase to use. Let me just show you how this might sound with a 4 bar phrase. I'll start with a crash, leave out the bell and kick notes in count 1 after the first count, and on the 4th bar, I'm just going to crash on the and of 4, but that's just filler. You can play any drum fill you want over there. And that is the Rush ride bell pattern that you will hear across many different Rush songs and different albums. It's not always played exactly the same way. Neil does play different variations depending on the speed of the song and the melody and phrasing. One of the favorite variations that I have is in the song Subdivisions, because that's an instance of this groove pattern that occurs in a 6/4 phrase instead of 4/4. What that means is a 2 bar phrase isn't 8 counts long anymore, it's 12 counts. You actually really need to listen to this because it makes so much sense in context with the melody of the song. And honestly, learning Rush songs was what helped me to internalize playing odd time signatures so much better, because if you learn a Rush song by ear, you're probably not even going to realize there are odd time signatures in there because everything is so connected to the melody. Anyway, here's an example of how the Subdivision ride bell groove sounds. You can find it around 2 minutes and 10 seconds of the song, and it is in 6/4, that's 6 quarter note beats per bar. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you learned something from it, and if there's one piece of advice I'd give you if you're trying to learn this, please slow it down, break it down, pause the video, just take a little section and loop that at a slower pace with a metronome. It took me a really long time to get this up to speed, so it's probably not going to happen overnight if you've not tried it before. So don't be frustrated. It can be done. You just got to slowly build up that muscle memory. If you've heard this groove in any other songs, whether they're from Rush or someone else, leave a comment with the title of that song so that we can all go check it out. Happy practicing, and I'll see you guys next time.